Right now, Australia is a continent that's literally being split in two by its weather. It's pretty wild. On the exact same day, you've got people in one part of the country preparing for what could be catastrophic flooding from a massive tropical deluge. Meanwhile, folks in another part are bracing for an extreme heat wave and a really dangerous fire threat. We're going to break down how both of these insane opposite events are happening at the very same time. And you can see this perfectly if you just look at a forecast for a single day. Up in Darwin, in the top end, it's classic wet season stuff, right? Hot, super humid, storms rolling through, plenty of rain. But then you go south to Adelaide, and it is a completely different world. Sunny, mild, and just bone dry. This isn't just some simple north-south difference. It's a little preview of the extreme competing weather systems that are clashing across the country. All right, so here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. First, we'll look at this big picture weather divide across the nation. Then we're heading north to dive into Queensland's massive looming deluge. After that, we'll shift our focus south to some different summer storms that are brewing. Then we'll track this intense heat wave as it spreads across the country. And finally, we'll connect that heat to the extreme fire danger it's creating. So yeah, as we've said, Australia is dealing with so much at once. Multiple really high impact weather events all at the same time. It's really a tale of two very different summers playing out across one continent. You've got this super saturated tropical north that's facing even more potentially record-breaking rain, while the southeast is drying out and absolutely baking under a dome of heat, creating some pretty explosive conditions. Okay, let's start with the first major story up in far north Queensland, and I gotta say, this is not just your typical wet season activity. No way. We're looking at a complex and very slow-moving system that's setting the stage for what could be a truly historic rainfall event, and it's threatening communities that are already completely waterlogged from weeks of previous rain. The thing is, this event is already happening. There's a mid-level low-pressure system just sitting offshore, and it's acting like a giant engine. It's just hoovering up incredible amounts of tropical moisture from the Coral Sea and aiming it like a fire hose right onto the coastline, from around Townsville and even further north. This has been going on for days, but believe me, it is about to get a whole lot worse. And this isn't just a forecast. The rain has already been absolutely bucketing down. Some spots, like Halifax and places around the Herbert River, have already copped up to 250 millimeters. That's almost 10 inches of rain in just one night. So the really crucial thing to understand here is that the ground is already soaked, the rivers are already high, and all of this is before the main event is even really started. So how does all this moisture turn into such a crazy amount of rain? Well, it's a mechanism called a convergence zone. Just picture two massive streams of air, one coming from the northeast and another from the north, smashing into each other right over the coastline. When they collide, that air has nowhere else to go but straight up. And as that moist air rises, it cools down, condenses, and forms these incredibly efficient rain-making clouds. This zone is what's going to focus all that rainfall onto a pretty narrow strip of coast. Okay. So this is where the numbers get, well, honestly, a little terrifying. As this broader tropical low really gets going offshore, the models are pointing towards rainfall totals of over 1,000 millimeters. That is more than a meter of rain. For areas along the Cassowary Coast, we're talking about towns like Innisfail and Mission Beach. To put that in perspective, that is just a landscape-altering amount of water. It's unbelievable. And this quote right here, it really highlights the biggest danger. It's not just about how much rain falls. It's about the state of the ground before it falls. As the analyst Josh from Cyclone's OZ points out, just last week, some of these same areas took on 1,300 millimeters of rain with only minor flooding. But the difference now? The river systems are completely full. They're at capacity. This means that even a smaller amount, say 500 millimeters, could now trigger major devastating flooding. So yeah, less rain could actually have a much, much bigger impact. Okay, so while all that is happening up north, a completely separate weather system is bringing a totally different kind of storm threat much further south, to the really populated areas of New South Wales and southern Queensland. Now these storms, they're not part of that tropical system at all. These are your classic summer thunderstorms, but they've got some specific features. We're talking about strong pulse storms. They kind of pop up really fast, they dump a huge amount of rain in one spot, some people call them rain dumpers, and they produce a ton of intense lightning before they just fizzle out. They're going to be scattered over a huge area, from around Canberra, up through the mountains of New South Wales, and into the Queensland border ranges. The good news, if there is any, is that the atmosphere just doesn't have that high-end instability you need for a really widespread, destructive, severe weather event. But still, they absolutely pose a risk for localized flash flooding and some dangerous lightning. And now we shift gears completely, from water to fire, or at least the heat that fuels it. While the East Coast is dealing with all this rain and storms, an enormous, intense dome of heat has been building out in the West, and it's now beginning its slow, ominous crawl across the entire southern half of the continent. So let's just track this thing's movement. It all started earlier in the week over in Western Australia, with inland places like Panawanica hitting an absolutely scorching 48 degrees Celsius. By Thursday, that core of extreme heat pushes east into South Australia, with forecasts again reaching those high 40s. And then, by Friday, this massive wave of dangerous heat just blankets Victoria and New South Wales, bringing widespread temperatures well into the 40s. This isn't just a hot day. It's a multi-day, cross-continental event of truly extreme heat. And of course, when you have heat like this, you have to talk about its terrifying partner, bushfire. This heat wave isn't just making things uncomfortable. It's actively creating the perfect, terrifying conditions for fast-moving, uncontrollable fires right across the most heavily populated parts of southeastern Australia. The real danger here is how these three things come together to create a perfect storm. First, you've got the intense heat, which acts like a giant oven, just baking every last drop of moisture out of the landscape. Second, the ground is already really dry, so there's plenty of fuel. And third, you add in strong, gusty winds that can turn any little spark into a raging inferno in seconds. It is the absolute worst-case combination you can have. And for anyone who lived through that time, this quote right here is just, it's chilling. The weather setup, the intense heat, the dryness, the strong winds is drawing direct and really alarming comparisons to the exact conditions that led to the catastrophic Black Summer fires of 2019 and 2020. This isn't just another day of high fire danger. This is a setup that has a devastating precedent, and that just raises the stakes immensely. So there you have it, a nation completely cleaved in two. You have communities in the tropical north who are sandbagging, preparing for record-breaking floods, and maybe being isolated for weeks. And at the exact same time, in the south, you have communities on high alert, preparing for a fire threat that has echoes of one of the darkest times in the country's recent memory. It really paints such a stark picture of the challenges we're facing. Seeing these two incredibly powerful, destructive, and completely opposite forces at play at the same time across the same country, it forces us all to ask a really difficult question. As these extreme weather events become more frequent and more intense, how do we actually adapt to what might be our new, much more volatile normal?